Hi, today we'll be colouring this lovely Zen image called Meditate by Twisttoon. I'll put a link in the description if you would like to colour along. I'll be using the colours that are listed on the left-hand side of the screen here. I'll be starting by colouring the skin, then a few tips about colouring clothes, and we'll finish with a nice brown-blue combination for the hair. So, if you're ready, let's get going. We'll start by using a blue-violet colour for the skin shading. I like to use this colour because the blue creates a nice shade colour with any brown that is added on top of it. And, as it tends towards violet, it doesn't look too cold. So, you can use any blue-violet depending on how dark you would like your shadows to be. If you would like your shadows to be less profound, you could also try just a violet colour, but try a violet that isn't very bright, like a V25 for example. It has to remain a shadow colour. You'll notice that I don't blend straight away, but I colour the whole body first with the shade colour. I prefer not to count too much for the shadows on the blending of the copic markers, but rather make sure that the lines of my shadows are clean and that they follow the contour of the face and body. I'm putting shadows underneath the hairline. This makes the hair look more realistic, as it's casting its own shadow on top of the head as it comes forward. You'll see that the shadows are all curved. There shouldn't be any corners or flat edges when you are shading organic shapes like faces or plants. Most of these organic objects are never flat. Even a leaf or someone with a really angular face is made of curves, not rectangles, not corners, not straight lines. Bear in mind that when you are colouring shadows, they are separate from the different skin shades. For example, you'll have the rosy cheeks and the nose colours lying on top of the shadow that is created by the colour of the face. Or the other way around, the shadow will be lying on top of the rosy cheeks and the nose colours. This is a good reason to colour the shadows first, as it's easy to get confused as to what is light and shade and what is tone once we start adding colours. With the E04 here, I'm just going to go and make some darker reds, just little points where we would notice a bit of redness. You'll see when this is finished that this colour will be diluted by the lighter shades that follow it. So don't worry if it looks a bit too dark for the moment. What this will actually do is intensify the lighter colours that we put there afterwards. Try not to colour over the blue-violet for the time being. We'll cover it a bit later. Just touch into it to blend a little. I'll stop yapping now and let you get on with some colouring. I'll be back for the next stage. After we're done with those points, we're going back over with the R22. Notice that I'm not completely covering the previous colour, but just touching the edge. In my experience, I suppose as I blend a lot of colours one after the other, I tend to get a weird texture if I overlay too many colours, which is why I try and stay just on the border at this stage. Incidentally, the blending paper that I'm using for this colouring is Copic Perfect Colouring Paper. I think it is also made by Letraset in some countries. I have seen colourists get away with using other papers like Bristol paper, but I find that they don't blend as well, and as they absorb the marker ink, you'll spend much more money on the ink to make up for the amount that it's absorbing. I'm not an expert though, so let me know if you have another experience than I do. Adding the reds first is a technique that comes from the old portrait oil painting. To mimic a correct skin colour, painters would put the red colours down first and then glaze over with a brown, which is kind of how real skin works. All of the pinks and blues that you see on your skin are actually showing through because your skin is transparent. They're not a colour painted on your skin, as you probably know. So, now I'm going to take the E34 and cover everything that I've just coloured. So, the purple shading and the reds will all be coloured over with the brown. I go from E34 to E31 here, but I don't have an in-between colour. I don't own one. It would have been better to have an E32, for example. So if you have one, then I would advise you to use that rather than going 3 steps down on the Copic shading. It's best not to blend more than 2 shades down with Copics, otherwise you might get a hard edge. So here, I'm not going over everything again, just as before, just blending the very edges of the E34 with the E31. Again, with the E51, it's the same thing. Just blend out the very edges. Don't run over the pigment that you've already laid down, because otherwise it will probably get diluted by your new colour. You can see here that we're getting very close to have a nice blended face and body. Here I'm using the E000. I remember when I bought this marker that it was so very light that I thought it's not going to be a whole lot of use, but I do notice the difference when I use this rather than just leaving a white space. So it does have its use after all. I never actually use the blender marker for copics. I did buy one when I first started, but I've never used it. When blending, I'll usually use the lightest shade of whatever the dominant colour in my image is. So here, I'm colouring skin. The dominant colour is brown, so I use the lightest shade of brown that I own. I would do the same with pink or blue. Blues, I own the B000s, so I often find myself blending the very whitest colours with that one. Here I'm going over and blending out anything that I think needs it. I'm always very careful with this part. You have to make sure that you don't wash all the pigment that you've got on your paper back out again. If you think that this is going to happen, you can always go back in with another colour and intensify that again, which is what I'm going to do with the R20 here, because I think that the reds aren't as intense as they should have been. On a note, as we were talking about washing out pigment, when you make mistakes or you think that you've gone a bit too dark with your colours, you can always use a lighter colour, copic, to pick back up that pigment. And you can save even some of the darkest coloured mistakes with this little tip. I'll probably make a video about it if you're interested. With the R20, I'm not so much blending, but intensifying the colours that now look a little dull. I think this is half because of the blending, but also because the copic markers will tend to get a little lighter as the alcohol evaporates and the ink dries. So sometimes you have to layer a bit to get the effect you're after. For the rest of the skin, I'll be either intensifying or blending the colours out until I'm happy. I'll let you continue blending and adding pigment where you need to. I'll be back to work on the dress. now I'm starting with a V25 on the dress. As I'm going to make the dress blue, I'm going to use a shadow colour that is a different shade. Using a different colour as a shadow is so that the colouring will not look too monotone. If you were to use a dark blue as a shadow and then a blue, it would kind of look as if it was just being hit by a blue light. And so adding a different colour as a shadow or a different colour as a lighter tone makes the drawing, the colouring, a little more realistic. When making shadows for materials like cloth, keep in mind the folds. When I'm making the line art, I try to leave you clues as to where the folds might go, without actually drawing them for you. So, when you see a bulge in the side of the material, on the waist we can see some here, just take the bottom edge and make a little diagonal flick down with your copic. This will create a kind of triangle, which would be the shadow underneath the material that is bulging out a little bit. If you have a marker that doesn't flick, you can make a thin triangular shaded area. The interest in making folds is to show that the material is independent of the object that it is covering. That is, that it is not following the exact contour of the person that is hanging on. If you shade material without these little folds, it might look like the person is wearing lycra or something that is skin tight. Most of the time, you can get away with just these little side folds. They are sometimes found in the corners of clothes, either in the elbows or in the knees. As she is wearing a dress, I have also created a little fold where the skirt part would have bunched up in her lap. This is just a semicircle. In any case, when you're making folds, try to make your darkest shade look a bit correct for whatever shadow you're trying to create. Once you're happy with that, then you can blend out with the other colours, and they should follow the contour and make the whole look good. Do try not to go overboard with the folds though. Just try to draw the least that you can get away with, and try not to make it look too even. If it looks even, then it might look like your clothing was designed that way and that they are not just random. I don't know if you remember, in the 1980s we had these dresses that were bunched up the sides and they had these folds that were curves in front. If I had made too many curves on the skirt, the skirt might have looked like this, rather than just randomly flowing around the person. For the rest of the dress, we just need to blend out the shadows we have already created with gradual lighter colours. I'll let you get on with that, and we'll be back for the hair. Now, onto the hair. I start always with the darkest part of the hair. In the same way as the face, it's a good idea to get an idea of the form. Here, I made a mistake. The hair isn't being hit by the same kind of light as the rest of the picture. It should have been coming from the right, but here it looks like it's coming from the top. Sorry about that. Still, here you can see how to do a very simple shading job on the hair. That the top, where there is the middle parting, should be shaded. Then, just next to the parting, at the top of the head, the light will hit it. Then, the bottom of the hair should be the darkest. With hair, do try not to make lines for every hair, but rather think about it in chunks, where batches of hair would blend together. We never, well, I don't, maybe it's my eyes, I never see individual strands of hair, and anyway, drawing strands would be very difficult with copic markers. So, just be happy to give the general form of the light and shadow, and let your viewer imagine the rest. Again, I'll let you cover the brown with the violet and create these shadows. Just overlap a little bit to let the violet show over the brown in some places. Then, when you're done, we'll be filling the rest in. Here, I'm taking a V25 marker and I'm covering the brown that I had coloured with the purple. This will turn the brown into a nice shadow colour and give it a little more depth. That is, a little more depth than if we'd have used a darker brown. Because as I said before with the dress, when you're making a shadow colour, it's interesting to have a different kind of colour that is the shadow. While I was colouring the purple shades for the hair, I decided to give her hair a blue sheen. I hadn't planned to do this when I started colouring. This piece and its theme is very symmetrical and balanced, so I thought that adding the blue to the hair to match the dress would therefore balance with the clothes and emphasize this theme. That is, if I could get away with some blue hair. And I guess it did. I think it looks quite good, and probably a hair combination that I'll keep for another picture. So, all that is left to do is the Jelly Roll white pen to give the picture a little bit of sparkle. This is of course optional. Here I'm using it to emphasize the highlights in the hair. I'm just following the line between the blue and the purple highlights. I'm making zigzags because I'm quite comfortable with that. But what you could do is just take the lightest part of the hair and draw lines as if they're hairs. Just the very lightest part of the hair. That's also quite a good effect to do. With the Jelly Roll pens, you get a lovely fine line. But the downside of using these pens is that you have to keep them moving so that they'll continue to draw. So before you do the stroke, you have to be very certain what you're going to make before you do that. You can get some pens that are acrylic, just ink, and they're a lot easier to work with. I used to use Posca, but I found that the line isn't as thin as Jelly Roll. But if you're just starting out, you might want to have a look at those as well. I do hope that you've enjoyed colouring along here and that this image has given you a bit of peace and zen. Have a lovely day, whatever you're up to today, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.